Estuaries, where rivers meet the sea, are places of extraordinary abundance and life. And the Squamish River Estuary, at the head of our coastal inlet of Atl'ka7tsem, Howe Sound, is just such a place. It's here that the Squamish River, a powerful flow gathered from rugged coast mountain glaciers, peaks, and valleys, meets the ocean, whose winds and tides spread the river's sediment across a broad estuary. And on these sands and muds grow forests and marsh, home to a rich diversity of life that has been a heartland for the Squamish peoples since time immemorial. Given such abundance, the Squamish River Estuary, known to the Squamish peoples as Skwelwil'em, is the ecological jewel of our coastal inlet. It's late January, and I'm driving up the Sea to Sky Highway. I'm heading to the estuary because at this time of year, the Squamish River runs low and clear, revealing secrets of the estuary's geological foundations that lie hidden beneath muddy waters much of the rest of the year. I pull in to get a view of the northern end of Atl'ka7tsem Howe Sound. This is where the flat Squamish River Valley meets the sea, with the town of Squamish and port on the eastern side to my right, and the Squamish River to the west on my left. From high above, the complexity of this shore is more apparent. The town of Squamish and the port are spread out along two narrow arms of the ocean, while the Squamish River is confined to the far western shore by a constructed berm called the Spit. Between the developed areas and the river is a broad expanse of natural tidal channel, marsh, and forest called the Central Estuary. But it wasn't always this way. Originally, the Squamish River entered Howe Sound through a complex of smaller channels, islands, marshes, and tidal flats, and the river was free to meander across the entire width of the estuary. This complex river mouth, teeming with life, was central to the lives of the Squamish peoples, and the site of the villages of Skwamish and Skwelwil'em. But settlers arrived, and by the 1920s, dikes had been built to protect the growing town of Squamish, cutting off the eastern estuary from the river. Then, in the 1970s, 3 kilometers of rock berm called the Spit were built to confine the river to the very western side of the estuary, on the expectation that a coal port would be built in the central estuary. Though the coal port was never built, the Spit remained. Over the years, the Spit Road has provided recreational access to the estuary, and today the seaward end of the Spit has become a center for wind sports. And so it's come to be that the once sprawling Squamish River has been forced into a straitjacket, disconnecting the river from the central and eastern estuary that it created. I ponder my plans for the day. I can see the long finger of the Spit, and I think I'll start upstream on the Squamish River, then follow the Spit downstream to the ocean. 20 minutes later, I'm walking down to a big gravel bar that spreads out along the river. I'm 4 kilometers upstream from the river's mouth, about where the river starts to feel the influence of the ocean's daily tides. The river level is low, revealing its gravel bed that lies hidden below muddy water much of the rest of the year. The river's low because, back in the mountains, everything's frozen tight. I notice too that the river water is clear. For most of the year, the river is muddy and opaque, but right now the fine silt from the melting glaciers is frozen solid, and what's left to fill the river is largely clear spring water seeping from its banks and tributaries. And all this gravel reminds me that the river is a great conveyor belt of rock debris. When river levels rise again in the spring, this gravel will resume its tumble downstream. I come upon a big cottonwood tree on the gravel bar, eroded from some riverbank upstream during a recent autumn flood, and stranded here as the flow waned. Several other flood-deposited trees lie stranded further down the bar. And on the far bank, trees have been toppled into the river by floodwater erosion. This tree debris is just the conspicuous part of a much larger flow of finer organic debris, leaves, twigs, and dissolved nutrients that the river carries to the sea and that fertilizes the estuary and ocean. But a truck on the Spit Road reminds me there's more to see, so I head back to the car. As I drive downstream along the Spit Road, the river is to my right, but I'm paying attention to the forest on the other side. I'm looking for the route to Crescent Slough. I find the trail and head in. Crescent Slough was once a channel of the Squamish River, but construction of the spit in the 1970s cut it off, turning it into a long arm of the sea. The slough still has its river channel shape, but without the river's flow, the ocean flows in and out with the tides. Those tides carry in river water and muds, and over the years the slough has partly silted in with marsh. Historic aerial photographs of the Squamish estuary prior to the construction of the spit show two major channels that flowed across a broad open space of marshes and tidal flats. Where I stand now was then on the banks of the eastern channel. But then they built the spit and everything changed. Cut off from the river, this rivermouth channel lost its flow of fresh water and mud, and instead became just an ocean shore. A little further down the spit I come to a large new culvert, at a place where the river and central estuary are separated by little more than the spit. This culvert and another one nearby are major restoration efforts led by the Squamish River Watershed Society to allow river water through the spit and into the central estuary. This rewatering of the estuary has important consequences. The culvert now allows juvenile salmon coming down the river better access to the rich marshes and tidal channels where they can fatten up, improving their survival at sea. Salmon stocks in the Squamish River plummeted in the 1970s after construction of the spit, likely because juvenile salmon could not access the central estuary with its sheltered habitat and rich food supply, and instead were washed directly out to sea. So it's now understood that further modifications to increase river flow through the spit are the path forward to revitalizing the salmon habitat of the estuary. This rewatering of the central estuary really is a vital requirement for rebuilding our Squamish River salmon runs. A little further downstream, the spit leaves the forest behind and now separates the river mouth and sandbars to my right from extensive marshes of the central estuary to my left. Here the current slows as it meets the ocean, and it drops its load of sand. Bars form, creating new land. The result is that the river mouth advances about the length of my kayak into Howe Sound each year. I walk out on a sandbar to take a look. I watch a group of seals across the river, and some cormorants roosting on a log. Gone are the gravel bars. Somewhere upstream, the river's energy has fallen to the point it can no longer move gravel. Only sand and mud are swept along to where I now stand at the river's mouth. And I can see that marsh sedges are advancing onto the sandbar, colonizing this new land as it's formed. I climb back up onto the spit and cross over into the central estuary. Though dormant and seemingly lifeless now, once the spring arrives with its flush of new growth, it'll be obvious that these marshes are the ecological heart of the estuary's rich biodiversity. However, today, the sedges lie flat and decaying, but lifeless they are not. Billions of invisible bacteria are breaking down the summer's growth, creating bits and pieces, and releasing its nutrients. This flood of organic debris released every year by the dying marsh is a vital secret to the richness of the estuary. Billions of tiny invertebrates, insects, spiders, snails, worms, and others, living in the muds below, feed on this minute organic debris, and in turn feed a myriad of other life. These great meadows of sedge and rush grow on a foundation of fertile muds carried to the sea by the river. Twice a day, these muddy ocean waters are carried by the rising tide up channels and onto the marshes. The millions of plant stalks act as baffles that dampen the energy of waves and current, allowing the muds to settle and so build a rich soil for the marshes. This lowly river mud is the magic ingredient that makes the richness of the marshes possible. This fertile soil is made of tiny fragments of upstream mountains and forests, fine silt and bits of organic debris. But I do wonder, are these marshes getting the mud they need? Before the construction of the spit, these marshes were bathed in muddy river water much of the year. Today, the only river water to reach the marshes flows through culverts in the spit or is pushed ashore by tides or wind from the plume of river water out in Howe Sound. So I'm left with the uneasy feeling that the spit may be starving the marshes of their precious flow of mud. Well, the sun is setting and the shadow cast by the mountains is almost on me. Time to go. I feel energized, bathed in the ecological vitality of this place, a dynamism that comes through even in this dormant winter season. Yet it is hard not to reflect on how this estuary has changed, from the river mouth that nature designed to the one that we have re-engineered. And so I'm drawn to the promise of the restoration underway, the work to re-water the estuary and rebuild nature's vital connections. There is much good work to do,